Hi and welcome to the Lightleaders, a podcast for lightworkers who want more money, power and impact. I'm your host, Alex E. Lember. I believe that we are currently in the middle of a global awakening of humanity and that leveraging entrepreneurship is the fastest way to raise the consciousness of our planet. So in this podcast, I interview lightworkers and conscious entrepreneurs who follow their soul mission and have built a business around it. I call them light leaders, and this is the new paradigm. You will hear their stories and, more importantly, receive tools, tips, and strategies on how you can also impact more people and grow your business while following your soul mission. If you hear little nuggets you love and you'd like to share, screenshot this episode and share on your Instagram stories. Make sure to tag us at the Light Leaders Podcast and we will repost. Welcome to this new episode of the Light Leaders. Today I'm doing something a little bit different with the recording of a panel of an event we've had here in Bali for the Light Leaders Mastermind. So it's a panel with Rieki from Seeds, Michael Healy from Unit, Fabrice Maravigna, with who I do the crypto workshops, and Oliver Laurent from Helix. And it's been a really interesting conversation. They have different point of views on topics like what's the new paradigm, tokens, decentralized governance. So really enjoy that conversation. And if you're interested in joining that conversation and these topics, make sure to join our mastermind. You can find more information on thelightleaders.org/mastermind. Okay, I'd love to start then. I'd love to ask Rieki, what do you think of the idea of voting? And the idea behind is, of course, people think, okay, we need to vote at some point so things get done. I know Oliver has a different perception on it. Do you think voting is the right way, knowing that it can help make decisions, but at the same time, whatever percentage you leave, it always leaves some people unhappy about the result?
Voting is a tool, and just like any tool, there's a right place to use it and a wrong place to use it. So I think there are circumstances where voting is the best way of aligning on a decision and making something happen. Other times there's a lot of other governance tools you could use. I think the full answer is probably bigger, but yeah, I think voting works in some cases. When you need something objective and clear and you have a predetermined time to come to that decision, I think voting is a really strong way of doing that. Other parameters, there's a million other ways you can go about making decisions and coordinating and sense making. So I'd say treat it like a tool, not the only tool, and get creative, because the reality is we don't really know. Our coordination systems right now kind of suck, and most of it is about exploration and trying new things. So does that answer the question?
As Rieki said, I think the tool needs to be adapted to the use case and the situation. Fundamentally, I believe that voting is based in what Spiral Dynamics would call a green paradigm, usually, where it's one person, one vote, and everyone is the same. Now, what Seeds has managed to do is to create weighting so that there is more specialization in who can vote on what, but you're still having the underlying assumption that everyone has a certain degree of knowledge about a certain thing. And when we actually increase in consciousness to what would be called a teal paradigm, we can see that the assumption changes into everyone has key uniquenesses that need to be leveraged in order to come to the best decisions altogether. Technology experts should be making the calls about how we implement a certain technology, and social experts maybe how we do the systems, so long as everyone is aligned, at least in the overall vision that we're all sharing and creating. So that would be my personal perspective. Voting can be useful, but it has its limitations to a previous paradigm that doesn't fully recognize the unique gifts of each individual.
can jump in really quick here. So I really like the concept of a liquid democracy. So, if you look at different governance setups, you've got one side of the spectrum, like a dictatorship. So something like, Singapore, something like China, where it's, one party or one individual, like Fidel Castro, or, a Nazi Germany, like a single individual, or a group of people that's on one spectrum. And on the other side, I think it's going to be a democracy, but it's going to be many, many democracies. So if you look at one perspective, the whole earth is one currency, or the whole earth is $1, it's one government. Then you go a bit to the other side, you've got like the United States, you've got China, you've got the European Union. Then you go a bit more to the other side, you've got countries. You've got like Indonesia, you've got Germany, you've got Brazil. You break it up even more, you've got now governance of city nations, so like Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau, Vatican City. So, and you go even more, you've got like neighborhoods or towns like Chengdu, Ubud, and then I'm talking about even taking it a step further, where even this this hotel is its own micro government, and I guess going back to the question of how you govern. So I'm of the belief that a good way to govern is not overcomplicating it. So a big problem with a lot of governance tokens or blockchains that try to do on-chain government, like using tokens to make votes or make decisions, is it's just so complicated and very few people actually make decisions. And a big problem is it ends up being a small number of people who control most of the votes, and it looks like 80% was participating in the vote, but it was actually maybe a very small handful which held most of the tokens. So how we approach governance at Unit is having it completely transparent. It could be one token, one vote. It could be, majority of the users are voting for this thing, and it's up to the operators to determine how to analyze this data. So it's really, it's really open to interpretation. And if people aren't happy with the result, they can sell their token or they can support something else. So that's our approach.
Sweet. Yeah, I don't have much to add to this, but I would be very curious to see voting in an actual state of democracy, because it's my belief that the politics that we've seen over the last decades were definitely not reflecting transparently the voice of the people. So, and also, if I was to participate in that kind of governance token, let's say if I had no opinion on something, I'd like to perhaps give my voice to a friend or someone that I value their opinion, and just give them, okay, well, you're the fitness guy, and that's a fitness question. Maybe so that'd be cool to see how we can empower each other and see each other in our strength. I like that.
So I actually come from the only country in the world which uses what we could call real democracy, Switzerland, where there's a there's a direct democracy vote. So every 6 weeks in Switzerland, people receive a letter through the post and need to vote for any change, basically, in governance of the country. And although it has been very good at giving back the freedom to the people, it has inherently also brought out the stupidity of people where they don't have the knowledge to vote on certain matters. And I can give you a very concrete example of this is that about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a vote in Switzerland for closing the borders of the country that was put through by a right party as a voting, brought to the vote. And all of the cantons, all of the regions that were bordering other countries voted against it because they knew how valuable immigrants were to their economy. And all the ones that voted for it were the cantons within the country, which actually didn't probably see that many immigrants that often. And it ended up passing and creating a lot of problems, which ended up having to get reversed and created a lot of issues. And so you fall to a fundamental issue of voting, which is that the collective has different understandings of different things that are partially based on their own blueprint, their interests, what they know, but also just based on their experience, on what they've been exposed to. And voting doesn't, in its pure form, doesn't address this matter. So even if we had a delegatory system, like you were talking about, Fabrice, the pride of the people who are voting to get rid of immigration would probably be higher than their willingness to surrender their votes to someone who lives on the border on the premise that they might know better than them about whether to let immigrants in or not. So you're still faced with the fundamental problem of human ignorance with a lot of voting systems. Anyway.
I feel like we're going to go all day on this, but last piece on me, I swear. And this is where I think it's really cool when we start programming governance, because you can start building all of these layers on top of it. So if you are wanting to give everyone a voice, which I do think is important, the next step is how much voice should people get? Because as you pointed out, not everyone is, one, equally intelligent about the problems or opportunities, or two, equally impacted by it. Some people who, if you're governing an economic system and one person's total livelihood is dependent on that economic system and someone else just bought a sandwich using it, those are two completely different paradigms for them. So that person whose entire livelihood's dependent on it should have more voice because it impacts them more. And that's something we can build into it. So if we have token-based voting, it's how many tokens you get, is how much voice you get. So then it comes down to how do you earn these tokens? And then you can build on top of that to, well, now you can delegate your voice to other people. And you should be able to delegate based on different topics. So I think every proposal that comes up might have a topic associated with it. This one's talking about geopolitics, and some people care about that. Great. If it's a geopolitical topic, then that's one area. And then people can delegate their voice that's relegated to geopolitics to certain people. But then you might have, housing and food and healthcare and et cetera. And each one of those is a different topic. And you could either vote directly yourself or have a representative vote for you. And the final cool piece onto this is that, once we get more data, we can start having objective metrics for how much voice someone could have. So we might be able to prove that this person knows more about geopolitics. It's not quite sure how we do that yet. This is just ideas. And then that person might have a 2x multiplier when it comes to geopolitics. I'm not necessarily saying this is a good idea, but this is how we can keep building on our governance systems to get more intelligent. Because I think we could have collective ignorance, which is driven by marketing and media, and they're really the ones making all the decisions, or we could have collective intelligence. I don't think we've figured out collective intelligence. But I do think this technology is helping us, helping us achieve that, potentially.
Thank you. We can go to next question. I'll go to you, Bobby. Just logistics. After you ask your question, if you stay 3 seconds there, I'll put it off so there won't be noise, and then I'll let you hand the mic for the next question.
Thank you. So building on what we've just been talking about, and this thought just occurred to me, so it might be a really obvious question, or otherwise it might, hopefully it generates some discussion. The link between politics and voting. So is there an intention for voting tools to be apolitical in the systems, or how do you see that? Oh, yeah, Rieki, I'd like to direct it to you first, please. Yeah.
This seems unfair. Nothing is apolitical. I think what's really important is that we, get clear about what politics and what the biases are. I think that's the clearest thing to do first. Could you repeat your question? I want to make sure I really have it because I was going to take it somewhere else, I'm sure.
It was really just, how do you see the relationship between voting tools and politics, and is there an intention to try and use decentralized systems or technology to deliberately dislocate that relationship?
Sure. I don't think we're going to get rid of that anytime soon. Politics, or even politicians, or politicking. All of that, I think, is going to stay around a really long time. My intention and hope is that we transform that into what politicians could be, which what a politician in his defined form is someone who's taking a lot of time to really understand the complexities of the problems and to try to think of good solutions. Right now, all of our politicians are spending all their time politicking, which is trying to get people to vote for them and pander to people and, all that crap that we don't like. But I do see a role for politicians that are people that are focusing on certain topics, wanting people to delegate their voice to them, and then trying to make good decisions. And what's really important is that that delegation needs to be able to get given and taken away instantly. So if that person isn't actually representing you right, then they can lose that voice. So now they really are connected to the people that they're supposed to be representing, and then they can just go about spending their time really understanding the nuances of the issue, because they're not trying to pander to get people to vote for them. If that makes sense. So I still think there's a role for politicians. I just hope that we can evolve how they're showing up in the world.
just touch up on that. I'm not sure how much of voting we would need to carry out a project successfully. Because the more question we ask, the more tins of worms we're going to have to open, and the more complexity. So it's going to have to be interesting to see when it is actually necessary to ask for people's voice, and when we are okay for some of us to carry out, as long as we stay in line with our highest values, perhaps. Because people want to live their lives as well and have different interests, and I wouldn't like to be asked like every 10 minutes, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? But for some key topics, yeah, for sure, I'd like to be included. So that would be interesting to just discern and come to an agreement on what these topics are, and yeah.
So the approach we take in the system we propose is that everyone who is part of a given agreement field, so anyone who's doing something together, that could be the agreement field of a country, or the agreement field of a project, or building a farm, is by default aligned with the same overarching scope of what they're trying to work towards, and that's called the master plan. And so already by having an approach like this, where you're defining the scope of what the purpose of that organization is, whether it's a country or a small organization, means that all decisions that are taken afterwards have to be in alignment with that, because everyone's there has agreed to that. And so you can actually come to a situation where you need less and less decisions to be taken in the first place, because you defined scope, and then a scope might be, okay, for this country we want to create education which helps all the people thrive and become good citizens and able to be happy and healthy, let's imagine. Then that might be quite a broad scope, but then you'd ask the education experts how they would go about implementing that. And then if it's not in alignment with what that scope was that everyone agreed to in that society, then they wouldn't be doing their job, and they wouldn't be able to even pass, the implementations. So by using scope and roles, you can end up fractalizing more and more the expertise and the people who actually know about a given topic to be the decision makers on it, even though everyone is aligned on what we're doing. How we're doing it gets fine-tuned to the people who are actually able to process that information and do their best job at implementing it. So in that way, we actually, in my belief, wouldn't need voting in the first place, because there would be agreement or not agreement. Do you want to join into this overall society? And if yes, then you can join the agreement field. If no, you don't. And then instead of voting, anyone can put forward proposed changes to how a big part or a small part of the society works based on the people in that agreement field. And then everyone would collectively decide together whether those changes are more or less able to help fulfill the vision that was set forth in the first place.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. I think, if you've got more data, then you can make better decisions. The problem with politics is you don't have the data. So, I think the ultimate goal is to get rid of all politics, all, politicians, because, what eventually happens is, you start off with a governance system, you've got 7 parties, and then the least voted party will just fade away, it will join to become 6, then to become 5, and you end up with 2 parties. So in like the US, you've got, the Democrats, you've got the Republicans. In the UK, you've got Conservatives, you've got Labour. So you look at the English language or you look at mathematics, there aren't political parties there, right? Because it just is, So really, I think the evolution of how society will move towards is where there aren't these big, political parties, and it's like, hey, what do you think of this guy? Or like, isn't she a great leader? You just kind of reduce the need of it. It's kind of like, artificial intelligence, machines have replaced so many jobs. And these machines don't really have personalities. They just do their job. You have, let's say, a bread toaster. It's like you put in the bread, you get out toasted bread. It does its job. So the unfortunate thing about politicians is you vote for him or her. They promise you this vision, and then what comes out is not really what they promised. So where I think we're going to move towards is not big government. Not like one cryptocurrency like Bitcoin ruling the world, or Ethereum replacing Bitcoin. We're going to have 100 million different tokens, micro governments. Even us as individuals, we're going to have our own government. And if a few of our friends believe in us, they'll buy into our token, they'll become part of our economy. So we're not going to have, big continent currencies or continent governments like United States or European Union. We're going to have very micro governments, and we're going to have bigger ones. So like, the Lightleaders token, that is a government too. If we believe in how it's doing a good job, we'll buy more of it. If we don't believe it's doing a good job, we'll sell it. If the operations need some help in how to govern, then they can create a question. We can participate using our tokens. Now the data could be interpreted where if you hold more tokens, we're going to do this thing. Or let's say the leadership says, it's a populist movement. They don't really know what they want. They're going to do this thing because it's good for the long-term sustainability. If that works out, the token does better, and then the market serves its purpose. It's really like how a centralized economy, centrally planned economies, communism or socialism compares with free market. So if you have a good business, people might not agree with the business, but if it's got a good product or service, it will do well. People might not like it, but if it's selling a good product or service, it will do well. But if you have a communist, centrally planned, socialist government, then there isn't that free market mechanism that's getting good companies to succeed and bad ones to fail. Yeah, so that's my perspective. Thank you.
Hello. We're all here because we want to work towards the new Earth, and we also want to be able to use the new technologies and the blockchains. How do you see this evolving? What can the blockchains and things like seeds and the groupings together, the DAOs, what is it that they can do for people? How will it affect people? And what do you see, the vision? What's your vision of the new Earth? Oh, I'll start with Michael.
Cool. Thanks so much. So, amazing, really cool things like Leaders Token, like Seeds. These are like internet nations, basically. And they each have, leaders and communities, people. Some have more people behind it. Some have got more money behind it. Really excited. I think really exciting. I think the big opportunity is where you as an individual can create a token for your name, yourself as a person. You can create one for your project. You can help your friend create a token. And then what they can do next is they can start getting their community to buy into this microeconomy. So, what's going to create this new economy, this new society is not, one person who says, guys, I've got a new way of organizing society. Everyone, please follow me. It's going to be, hundreds of millions of people creating their own micro-governments, like what Oliver was saying, with cantons. The cool thing about Switzerland is there isn't a prime minister of Switzerland. They're all in its own cantons. And they all represent, some have 100 people, some have got, 50,000 people, and that's its own micronation. But the problem is if it goes too big, like I was living in Hong Kong 4 years ago, and 2 million people, so there's 7 million people in Hong Kong, 2 million people, 2.5 million people went to the streets. They were not happy with the government, and look what came out of it, not very much. Because when you control the monetary system, you can control everything basically. You control the army, you can control, essentially every company, organization within that economic system is a subsidiary of the economy system. So even if you're a business in Hong Kong, you've got a lot of staff, you're still serving under this government because you're using this currency. So what would be really cool is if those 2 million people created a better Hong Kong token, a better Hong Kong currency, and then everyone pulled out money from the Hong Kong dollar to this new Hong Kong token, and then that's how the shift is going to happen. So I guess to sum it up, what you can do is create your own token, build your own microeconomy, ideally have a business model behind it, because a lot of cryptocurrencies, they're just based on hype or speculative value. They don't have a business behind it. It's like internet companies which didn't have a business model. They just said, hey, we're Google, we help you do search. Like that, only when Google figured out ads, it became valuable. So I would recommend every digital asset be less like a currency, be more like a stock, with an underlying value asset behind it. Then build your own microeconomy. So I think that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I see it a bit differently. I see that improving capitalism in the way that Michael is suggesting is not per se going to give us a new paradigm, but is going to give us a step in the right direction towards a new paradigm. I think that fundamentally the assumptions of capitalism and the separation that each individual business is literally programmed to not only believe but experience is creating a lot of the dysfunction in the society that we are currently living in. And to move into a new paradigm, we need to start operating like a whole living system and not with a bunch of separately organized nodes competing against each other to who has the most valuable token, or which token to buy to make a good investment in which company in which place, and then you have like a million tokens. I see the value in it in terms of a transitionary mechanism, but I personally believe that the new paradigm is one where we start thinking more in terms of a collective intelligence as a species, as to where do we really want to head as a species, and how can we organize ourselves through natural law mechanisms in order to get there. And I think with the raise of consciousness that is anyway happening on the planet in this time, it's going to become easier and easier for people to coordinate in a synchronistic, in a good manner that allows resources to be allocated in the best place. And so the role of an economy should just be to enable people to coordinate in the best way possible. People know how to coordinate and will know more and more how to do so, as I just mentioned. And so the tools should enable them to do that at a greater capacity, relying on the human as a coordinating force, not some technology. The technology can help get us there, but it's only ever a tool that is going to help bring out the best of humans to tap into the collective wisdom and that flow of intelligence that we are all connected to, and that is all part of a one intelligence.
So for me, Noel, it's like a little bit like asking at the very beginning of internet how this new innovation is going to actually change the planet. And I think we need to acknowledge how much we don't know also about this. It's going to reveal itself, basically, and stabilize itself and curate itself. And it's great that we can all have like a very valid, very powerful models and probabilities. I believe that this technology is going to enable us to work frictionlessly. So the technology will fade away. It will sort of like be more impactful in a way, but less present in the way we relate in our communities. For me to have hundreds of millions or even billions of tokens is an interesting, I'm contemplating that whole thing. Because my question is like, we see this with Facebook and Instagram. Let's say 3 billion people have a page. It's only relevant to the people we actually connect and interact with. There is a certain level where who cares if we all have 10,000 Facebook friends if in our real life we only talk to 200 of them, right? So I like to see how we're gonna to vote in a way with our money. We're gonna to say, I see value in you, Michael, because da 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 da. But is this gonna to be a paradigm of economic value, or are we gonna to redefine what value is in the new earth? Maybe we will start valuing each other on honesty, on wisdom, on our ingenuity, maybe. And maybe it's just another utopian attempt to reinvent the wheel and our human nature will just, So I just wanted to throw that in the mix. Noel?
What does the new Earth look like? I think that's up for us to create. So I heard you mentioning that this technology is going to figure itself out. That's not necessarily true. The technology is being built by people with all sorts of different interests. So if we have an interest of a world that's more collaborative, then we need to build that into the systems. Because right now, people who really believe in the story of capitalism, they're driving a lot of Web3. So a lot of Web3 is focused on exacerbating capitalism. How do we make it so more people have more control? And that's what's financing things. But simultaneously, this technology could be used for creating different types of economic systems. The only thing I really give a shit about, and the only reason I'm using this tech, is because of its coordination capacity to start healing our planet. Right now, if you talk to anyone, talk to 99 out of 100 people, they want clean air, they want clean water. They don't want to poison and kill our Earth. But we're still doing that, and we're doing that because our dominant economic systems reward destructive behavior and punish regenerative behavior. Right? So businesses that want to be more regenerative, they typically make less money, and they have to work against a lot of incentives. And our current financial systems are literally subsidizing the problems. So if we really want to solve that, we need to change it so that the most profitable decision is the most regenerative decision. And we can do that by rewiring the incentives at the foundation. And that's what this technology allows us to do, is rewire base incentives for what we consciously want. So, we can call it a conscious currency or a conscious, ecosystem, because we can take our awareness and we can build it into the protocols. Why current capitalism didn't have that consciousness. All they said, and they didn't have the capacity because they couldn't program that into the foundation. All they said was, supply and demand, we'll just let that run with it. We'll say greed is a good thing, and we'll hope that greed plus supply and demand creates more goods and services in the world. It does that, but it's also been destroying our planet. So we need to take those same incentives and say, good, how can we make the most profitable decision the most regenerative decision? And if we can do that, where every decision, the most profitable one, is also one that's the best, for the planet, and it's the net positive for humanity, then that's how we can start redirecting all the incentives to start healing our planet. And that's what's cool about this technology, is how we can redesign those incentives at a large scale to build the world that we want. But that requires all of us to start coming up to the show right now and start bringing that image to it. Because if we sit back and we let other people drive it, then they're driving their vision for the future and what they want. So this isn't a passive game. This is something that we have to show up to right now, and we have to build it. Otherwise, someone else's vision is going to be built. And I can tell you they're not as beautiful.
Yeah, I want to ask the question about value. And do you guys see a world in which maybe value isn't even present, and it's a world like, let's say, the new paradigm is a place where we can energetically contribute our gifts and everything, all that stopping the energy and all that blocking, and let me pay you and value you, and that maybe doesn't exist. And if you do see that, what's the difference between that and affecting people that are still in the value mode to try to turn the system around? I'll start with, forgot your name?
Fabrice.
Fabrice, yes.
So I haven't put a lot of thinking in this direction. I think if we just look at where we come from at the tribal level, perhaps, if they value, in safety, protecting the life of your tribe, or going harvest some honey in the tree, like, do we value these things, or it's just that it's just happening? Everybody's just randomly doing their things, and somehow it creates a painting. I think as a human being, we have fundamental values, like the right to feel safe, the access to fresh water and air and the rest of it. Stuff that's already in the Constitution, right of association. Like, we value these things, just, hey, we all want to have a good, simple life at the end of the day. But it's kind of like we've evolved out of that into many advancements, technological advancements, industries. So it's like consciousness itself came out of the jungle and the very simple tribal living to try and create even more contrast and to realize itself through all these different ways. So I don't have a very, very black or white, very binary answer to you, brother. I do believe that we value few things like safety, all of that. But as far as when it turns out to 5,000 people or 20,000 people living together, it's just gonna have to create endless complexity. And my views are just mine. We're trying to merge into a very harmonious tribe. And yet our very human nature, by default, we all want to pull the blanket our way, the way I see things. My intelligence, my views, and we kind of gonna to contradict each other inevitably. So I don't know if that brings any part of the answer, but that's what I can contribute.
I think humanity's been in an abusive relationship with terms like money and value, and certainly like the New Age movement, we just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So we hear money, and money's been something that's been used to abuse and manipulate us. So I think some people look at money and say, okay, well, we need a money-less society because money is evil. And that might have been true because money was being evil, but it was that relationship, and we can redesign that relationship and then use that tool to help. And that same thing with value and that concept of it. I'm always going to value a deep, beautiful lovemaking session. That's something I'm always going to value. So I don't think we get rid of the concept of value. I think we just re-ascribe it and we redesign it how we want it to be. Right now, the economic system says what's valuable. It puts dollars and puts numbers on things, right? But those are all systems that were designed hundreds of years ago. And that's what's driving our behavior and driving our conception of value. We use dollars in our head to say what's valuable. So we've taken in someone else's concept of what is value, we turn that into value, we agree to that story of value, and then we say that is valuable. And I think that relationship that we're having with that dollar concept and how abusive dollars have been on the world, that then we say, okay, that concept as a whole is bad, we gotta get rid of it. We need a resource-based economy that has no money because money is evil. So my thing is just to question these concepts and wonder, is the relationship a problem? Or is it just the type of relationship that we've been in? And let's not throw off all relationships. Let's just get out of our abusive one and go and find the right one. So anyway, I don't think we're going to get rid of the concept of value. I just think we get to redesign what that looks like and how we interact with it.
Beautifully put. I think there's two parts to unpack to this question. The first one is relating to the intrinsic value that every person holds as a sovereign being, and that shouldn't be disrespected in the way that it is in today's society, and that people should be able to benefit from the natural abundance that our earth provides. We have the resources and the technology on the planet for everyone to be healthy and thriving, now maybe for the first time in history, with the latest ways we've been able to use technology. And so in that sense, if we let ourselves not only be creative as to the vision as to where we can head with society, but also design intelligently to get there, then we can end up in a system where everyone's basic needs are met, and where we switch the baseline assumption of economics from the allocation of scarce resources to the study of the distribution of wealth. And that in that transition phase, people will have to go through their own transformation from having their own paradigm in scarcity to one of having their needs met. And all sorts of problems which we see in our current society end up getting eliminated when our baseline is abundance, such as 99% of all crime gets eliminated because that is all coming from an underlying assumption of not enough and scarcity. And so in that model, would you still need to measure value? Well, inherently, people have their needs met. So what you measure then is how you can distribute the extra value, the extra abundance in a way which can benefit the most people and in the ways most coherent with our overall values, our overall vision as a society. So it becomes much more of a question of how we can all thrive even more, because we're all already thriving a certain amount. And this brings me to the second side of this point, which relates to the conversation or the topic that was spoken of earlier, which is around governance and getting more and more localized versus being at a big level. I truly imagine that in the future we'll be seeing many more nation states type of things, communities self-govern, that all together may share an overarching set of values, universal agreements, things which 99% of all humans on Earth can agree are probably a good thing, like not committing murder, like respecting people's sovereignty. Like these things we can probably all say, yeah, like we want that to be pretty universal throughout the world. But then on a more specified term, each of these micro-societies may experiment with their different values for a very good reason. And that is because consciousness isn't trying to homogenize everything. That's the opposite of how consciousness works. Consciousness is trying to experiment in as many ways possible to discover as many nuances available to the infinite intelligence as can be conceived of. And so in that light, these societies will provide test beds for different fine-tunings as to how value can be expressed. Maybe one society is a society full of bodybuilders and all of their excess value goes into creating new bodybuilding initiatives, and there's nothing wrong with that. Will create that unique human experience that certain people will choose to go to. And part of this will involve the free movement of people in those agreement fields, so long as we're able to respect what each individual agreement stands for in the first place, then we can be part of it. So I see a society where everyone is, let's say, equal in their ability to be able to navigate and move and migrate, and we are inherently migratory beings, but also one where there is a high degree of fine-tuning and specialization and flavors of consciousness happening that many people can experience, and it will create a rich multicultural environment for everyone to thrive in.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think continuing on from that, one nice way to think about this future, more abundant society is to look at the internet. The internet gave an abundance of information to people. Now, information used to be just for, people who had a lot of money or a lot of power, and now, the average person with access to the internet has way more information than someone with the most amount of money 40 years ago. It's commoditized it. Same with the mobile phone, used to cost, $1 a minute to make a call, and now it's, with WhatsApp, with Telegram, with, whatever messaging app, it's almost free. So the big problem though is value and money still hasn't become commoditized. Some people have a much greater access to it, and most people still don't have, if they want to raise a small bit of money, or if they want to, pay their rent, support their kids, whatever, it's still really tough. So I really think tokens can provide for this value distribution, and it's just a matter of time. I think by 2025, 10% of the population will be actively using tokens. I think by 2030, it's going to be 80% of the population. So in the next 8 years, it's going to be incremental growth, then it's going to be exponential growth. And then going back to this perfect future society, I think if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people have different levels. The base of it is shelter, it's food, it's clean air. And once you've satisfied this, you can kind of work your way up. And I think once we satisfy the money piece, people have this basic base of money. Then they can worry less, they can stress less, they can do things that actually really makes them happy. So I think that's how we're going to get towards this higher base of people reaching their maximum potential and having more opportunity. However, I think it's very important not to be too idealistic about it. Oops. So, Greenpeace, amazing movement, people protesting, wishing, a lot of pizza has animal rights. But, the problem with people protesting like in Hong Kong or Greenpeace or people wishing for this idealistic society is that it doesn't create a win-win. You've got big pharmaceutical groups, you've got big, meat producers. And if you create a new system which is in conflict with this old system, it's going to be very hard to get it moving. So, I used to work for this group called the Founders Forum. And it consisted of most people, like the people invited there helped run the world. It's like the World Economic Forum for Tech. And I think how we can get these billionaires of the world behind this new economic system and this new value creation system is make a win-win. So create a new system where they make more money. You know, the Jeff Bezos of the world, it's okay. You know, he makes $200 billion now. In this new system, he can make $700 billion. But at least allow the 2 million Amazon employees or the 2 million Uber employees to get a piece of the pie. So it needs to be a win-win. So we call this like the cooperative token economy, where if you were the first Uber driver, when Uber went public for $80 billion, 2 million drivers, at least get a piece of the pie. So we think in the future, going back to, hey, create your own token, this is really to redistribute the wealth. So fair enough, you will benefit more because you've got most of the pie, but at least instead of having the whole pie, you give some of it to other people. And the way this is done now is through stocks and shares, but the unfortunate thing about stocks and shares, it's very inefficient. You can't really distribute value. So the cool thing about tokens and 100 millions of tokens is it allows you to share and distribute wealth in a very capital efficient and economically efficient way. So everyone really benefits. And when there's so much money flowing around the economy, then everyone will thrive. But going about it where, hey, this is one system which is to fix everything, I think won't do as well as having 100,000 systems where most of them will fail, but you're going to have a few which are mildly successful and few which are very, very successful. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add briefly on that, I do see that there's a place for a lot of these vehicles like tokenomics and what you're doing with units. Personally, I would see it as a transitory system, though. I would see it as a way to improve capitalism, and it's still relying on that fundamental assumption that we are separate from one another, and that we need to figure out our own way to get our wealth through the right community engagements and right tokens we buy and start our own token. It still has the degree of separation, which I think we're going to be evolving out of. Now, that being said, it is something which can leverage a lot of the assets that are stored in the old paradigm and help bring them over to the new. So it has a lot of benefit in that sense too, but I don't see it by any means as the end solution. I think that money is a representation that is, not really backed by anything usually, of resource. And in a new paradigm, we can just jump straight to the representation or to the resource itself and to how we actually use that resource in a way which we can all benefit from, both with individual sense-making and collective sense-making for how to best use resources. This is where we introduced the concept of access. So the more you participate in an economy, the more you can receive access to the fruits and benefits of that economy. So you're still rewarding people's intelligence to be able to go and participate in the way that calls them most, which, by the way, if their basic needs are met, they're going to go do in the way which they enjoy the most, right? And not try and do something that they don't care about. So if you have those basic needs met and you have access, then your participation gives you a right to benefit from everything the economy is creating. And you don't need money to trade and to have, you need to make your commission so you can have your ability to live and you this and that. But you're just all accessing something together that you're helping to co-create in unity.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I should throw this in the mix, but reflecting on what you shared, I think, what if that idea that we can just all do what we like, everybody wants to eat, but nobody wants to do the dishes. Everybody wants to eat, but nobody wants to grow the food or whatever. So in a practical way, when we come together, I believe there will always be things that we actually don't feel like doing, but they still need to be addressed. And so perhaps that's one component of value, because if you're willing to do something that I'm not willing to do, then I'm willing to give you some, a little extra for that. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring this into the conversation.
It's a good point. I think with a lot of hard labor jobs, the way that consciousness seems to be evolving on this planet is that more and more of them are getting automated and done by machines. And there's a whole school of people, most of the people on the planet, which are getting incredibly worried about this because they're wondering, well, how am I going to be able to have a job, to be able to get my own money, to be able to survive, because they're excluded from that new value that's being created of machines doing it. But fundamentally, this is ridiculous because we have more and more technological ability to do all of these hard things, So why can't we all benefit from the fruits that the machines are doing? Why should the person who owns the machines be the one that is the one benefiting if the machines are in service of a healthy, thriving collective? So we have to challenge the fundamental assumptions underneath things. Now, there are still going to be instances where someone's going to have to do the dishes, but if you've ever lived in a community you love and care about the people that you're around, whether it's doing the dishes or the farming, you're quite happy to do that because you care about what's being created together. And so I think fundamentally we can shift our view into one of being inclusive and engaging one another to do things from the heart. And that can be the underpinning of a future civilization.
Just to make a quick point, I mean, it's really nice, this idealistic view, but you know, you look at Venezuela, you look at Soviet Russia, you look at communist China, you know, all of these communist states, socialist states had really good Marxist principles. You know, the idea that everyone has a nice base, you know, everyone's taken care of, you can do what you want, everyone gets paid the same. So, you know, whether you're work in a bakery, whether you're a policeman, whether you're a farmer, everyone gets paid the same. There is no jealousy because everyone gets paid the same. But what happens is, as you said, you know, people don't want to be doing certain work, value doesn't get allocated efficiently, it's centrally planned. So, you know, you've got Moscow deciding how the whole country should be run, or you've got Beijing deciding how the whole country will run. And then what happens is there's a black market that emerges alongside it. So, you know, people will be like, oh, you know, I actually want some more bread, I don't want to line up for this time. I'll give you this. So you got a secondary economy emerging. So, you know, I'm a big fan of capitalism because it's able to allocate resources better than a communist, heavily centrally planned system. But I think what is going to be the evolution is a combination of the both. You know, where if there's a machine which is generating a lot of value, you know, it shouldn't go to one person. It should go to 50 people, right? The goal is not you know, to create more money, the goal is to create more value. And then when you've got so much value, you know, then you can just spread around. If you think about oxygen, you know, everyone can breathe, there's so much oxygen. If someone tried to sell you air or oxygen, you know, it'd be a bit of a tough sell, right? So if there was just so much more food going around, you know, so much more products and services, so much more production, you know, then that's what's really going to allow society to thrive. And how do you get, you know, more production? You get more entrepreneurs, you get more investors, and if everyone has the opportunity to be an entrepreneur and investor, you know, you're going to get a lot more experiments, you're going to get a lot more failures, but a lot more successes, and that's how we're going to progress, I think, to this, you know, 2030 society where, you know, society really thrives and it's all on a more micro scale than a macro scale. So really excited for that.
We could talk about this for hours, so we should maybe go to other questions. There's a philosophical underpinning that's a bit different, I think.
So I think despite the different views of what the idealistic future looks like, it seems inevitable that blockchain will help us get into this really beautiful future where there's a great distribution of wealth and the way we organize the society in a more conscious way. But I want to be a little bit of a party pooper and ask, like, what's the biggest headwind that you foresee that could prevent this utopia from happening? What is the biggest threat that we need to be wary of?
Happy to start. First, let's unpack the question a bit. I don't believe in utopia because I think that humans will be constantly progressing and constantly improving on the way that we can learn to organize and distribute resources and have a great time in this life. I think really we can move within my lifetime to a society where most people are happy, healthy, and thriving. I think that that's very achievable. But that's going to keep changing as the world conditions change, and we're going to keep finding new objectives and new things to do. So that was just a side note. But in terms of the biggest roadblock, I see that the advent of a new paradigm is, or a new Earth, let's say, is inevitable. I see that the Earth has already upgraded on different realms, and that our work here is to help translate that into the physical realm through the mechanistical moving of energy into the way it is reformed in the new Earth. And so whether or not humans make it or how we make it is what's in question, but the Earth will evolve, and that to me is obvious. So the biggest roadblock is really how much are people going to resist the change that is anyway happening? And the amount of resistance is directly correlated to the amount of suffering in everything, from your own life and your own emotions to a societal level. So the more we resist the change, the more suffering is going to happen. And the easier we make the change for people, the less suffering there's going to be, and the more smooth and the less casualties will be along the way. So really the focus I see is to create the right systems, structures, blueprints, such that the choice to engage in a new paradigm, it requires less and less energy and is easier and easier for more and more people, so that it's more appealing and there's less hurt and resistance that has to happen along the way.
I can see two parts to answer your question, but I think collectively we're going to get closer to answering you. So one of the biggest is obvious, it's the establishment. The world have been going a certain way for hundreds or thousands of years, and those in power, the establishment, are obviously going to do what they can to limit the spread of that technology, access to some of these technologies. And so one basic answer could be a lot of regulations are going to come up. And it's like, who's making those regulations? Well, those who control the game. So then it's like, if you don't comply to our regulations, you cannot be part of the established system. Now, this leads us to a very personal choice. How are you personally going to vote with your life force, with your consciousness, with your dollars? Are you just going to try to make a quick bucks? We all want to make money, let's not lie to ourselves. But to what degree? Because what I see a lot in cryptocurrency is just people tokenizing the existing system that's not working. We know it's not working. And we're kind of selling our soul to the devil in that respect, because we're just like, oh yeah, the bankers are making their own tokens. Let's make money. Let's ride that wave. And I suppose that's a shadow that just needs to be contemplated, because if we do truly want to see a change in the world, it's really what are we going to support? How do you invest your energy, right? So some projects are projects from the older paradigm. And it's a very personal question. How much do you want to be part of the change? Do you want to somehow, it doesn't have to be just so polarized, we can include the old into the new, but perhaps just keep the qualities and things that was functional. So I don't think it's, again, binary. We tend to polarize everything and take very strong positions. It can be both, but we need to individually show with our speech, with our actions, that, hey, even though it's just one drop in the ocean, I'm not happy to just copy-paste a dying system that is not working.
I think it might sound like a simple answer to say the establishment's the biggest threat, but as we historically see, anytime the establishment tries to resist anything, I think it just creates more opposition. So I really think any type of resistance that's coming from the old system is going to bring more people into the new one. I think our biggest threat is ourselves and what we settle for. I see 3 different horizons, at least, in crypto and this blockchain space. One horizon, I just see the exaggeration of the current system, so capitalism 2.0. It's the same paradigm, it's just the same concentration of wealth story that's been going on for a long time. It's just exaggerated and quicker and more efficient. I see a revolution story, which is a redistribution of wealth. So like Bitcoin's a good example of redistribution before it became co-opted by capitalism 2.0. But Bitcoin early on, it was the renegades, the change makers, the off parts of society, the craziest thinkers. I loved Bitcoin back in the day. And it redistributed a lot of wealth to these folks. So then you saw that redistribution, and then those people went on to build, which is the third paradigm, Renaissance technologies. So this is the three type of paradigms I see. One, exaggerating of the current system, which is what a lot of energy in blockchain's going into because it's being fueled by the, the current dominant system. So a lot of the traditional money's coming in and building tools in Web3, right? We saw the redistribution of wealth, the revolution story, which a revolution, it's literally revolving, right? It's a different dictator, different person in power. If Bitcoin sees its end, now Satoshi Nakamoto is the next trillionaire. We don't need a trillionaire. Why do we have a trillionaire? So that's the revolution story. But Web3 offers the Renaissance story, which is the idea that we can redesign what our economic systems look like. We could redesign what civilization looks like. That's what I kind of hear Oliver and, a lot of people, here, and why we're here is because we see an ability to redesign what civilization could look like. And I think that's possible. But I think it's all up to every one of us what we settle for. If we decide, we're actually into short-term profit, we like capitalism 2.0, then that's what we're going to get. If all our money and value and time and energy goes into short-term gain, so then we're going to get capitalism 2.0. If we want to put all of our time towards, the redistribution of wealth and setting up our own tokens so we can capture all the value again and redistribute wealth to ourselves, then we're going to get the revolution story. And sure, we can have a ton of different micro-revolutions and redistribute wealth. We can do that. That's fine. Or if we want to go for the harder story, the Renaissance story, then we have to commit to that. But I think, if there's a biggest threat, it's what we settle for, and it's where we want to direct our energy, and what we want to get behind. All three of them are happening, and they're all going to happen regardless. But, which one you're going to be a part of is kind of up to you to decide, right?
Can jump in and continue on for this. So I guess it's really easy to just pick a problem, say, some people said communism was the problem. Some people said, now they're saying capitalism is the problem, or saying hey, we shouldn't have billionaires, tax the rich. It's very easy to just, pick a problem and say, it's all their fault, and really blame them. And I think it's a little bit of delusion, or lack of education. Same way, people criticize the war on drugs. People are like, reefer madness. People are complaining about CBD and weed, and the governments tried and pushed it back, and eventually people realized that cannabis, hemp, very very useful, and it just made its way. So I think big risk is education. So if people aren't educated, they don't know what they're doing. A lot of people in crypto, they could run Ponzi schemes. They could create a token, tell their friends to buy into it, say it's backed up by speculative value, and then they don't even know themselves that they're going to end up causing a lot of people to lose a lot of money. People buy these tokens, nobody buys it from them, it's worthless, or NFTs. So if people are educated, then hopefully they create good tokens which actually have a business model, which employ people, which have real products or services, not tokens which are new money replacing the US dollar, which might not have any value. Second thing is government. So I think the big problem with governments is they're not a big group of really bad people trying to take over the world. I've spent a lot of time speaking to government leaders or people who are very powerful in business, and a lot of them are just so disconnected. They just don't understand what's going through like a small business person. And they don't know how to create a win-win. They're so having to deal with so much internal politics that they don't know how to create a situation which works for everyone. So I think, what needs to happen is a win-win. One where it's not just, the big corporation that benefits and the CEO is under stress because they have to serve their shareholders. It's one where everyone really thrives, so really a win-win. And then I guess the third one is, in terms of big risk, is how long is this thing going to take? Because, with the internet, it took 20 years. Like the early internet, Yahoo came out in 1992, eBay in 1993. It took 20 years before, the internet was a thing. The mobile phone, before the iPhone, there were a bunch of smartphones. You had the BlackBerry, you had the Nokia communicator, but the iPhone really changed the game. That was where, everyone was like, okay, the smartphone actually solves problems, it creates real value. The big problem I have with cryptocurrencies and digital tokens is it's kind of like pre-iPhone. They work, they're around, some people use them, but they're not particularly useful. A bunch of people are crazy about crypto, but do they really solve a problem at the moment? Not yet. So I think where it's going to come really valuable is where everyone goes, okay, I create a coin. This allows me to share the value that I'm creating in my business or my community with my community. Really distributing the wealth better and keeping transparency or accountability. Because if you don't have the accountability and the distribution of value, then cryptocurrencies, it's nice marketing to say, Bitcoin is going to change the world or all of these other cryptocurrencies, but it's not as real or problem solving as it should be. So yeah, those are my 2 cents.
just add one thing here is I don't think in any way a solution is to point fingers and say this is the problem or this is the problem, this is why this happens. That's the same consciousness as the problem itself. The solution, in my view, is we want to do things differently. We're building it. If you want to join, come join us.
Thank you for taking some of your precious time to listen to this podcast. If you stayed until the end, I assume it was insightful. So if you like this podcast, please share with friends. Remember that if you tag us in your Instagram story at the Lightleaders podcast, we will repost. Tell us what you've learned. You can also leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Now, if you want to stay posted about new podcast releases, especially as we get censored more and more on big tech platforms, make sure to join our newsletter and our Telegram. You'll find the links on thelightleaders.org, and feel free to contact me directly too, whether it's for feedback or potential collaborations. Thank you again, and let's co-create the conscious new earth together.